Today we're looking at The Psychology of Stupidity by Francois Marmion. I stumbled across this in a W.H. Smith on an M4 Services and thought that's perfect to give to one of my work colleagues. I thought I'd better read it first, obviously, and went through it and decided that under no circumstances can anyone give this book to anyone because we're all in it and it'll just look like you're trying to tell them something. So worth a read, but yeah, don't gift it, whatever you do. It's mostly and sort of largely based on a series of interviews with various experts in different areas of psychology, sort of thing. And it's an attempt to sort of whittle down to what stupidity is, who it affects, what it looks like, and what can be done about it. It was originally written in French, and someone has done a fantastic job of translating sort of slang terms for stupid or thereabouts from French into English. It's quite a remarkable job to have done. It's worth reading almost for the list of slang terms on its own. It's a difficult book to summarise because the whole thing is basically an essay on stupidity. But there were three interesting quotes I picked up from the middle of it. A good way to sort of set the tone. And the first one is, uncertainty makes you crazy, certainty makes you stupid. There's great minds think alike, small minds collide. And to try and convince an idiot makes you an idiot. I really like those. Those three quite nicely capture the idea in the book, I think, albeit there is a bit more complexity to it. A little surprisingly, the book doesn't actually come up with a nice compact definition for what stupidity is, but I think that's perhaps kind of the point, in that it takes a whole book basically to try and whittle down the ideas and rule out what it isn't and what it is. It even goes into a department of stupidity, I guess, as it were, that the book refers to as arseholery, which it broadly defines as just being self-serving in all areas of life. So someone who is self-serving in work, for example, but kind at home, isn't technically an arsehole. They have to be terrible in all these areas. And apparently, positively, these sort of people are extremely rare. It does, however, denote, therefore, that objectively and scientifically, Donald Trump is an arsehole. And this is actually in the book, it's not my opinion. Just putting that out there. And interesting that Stalin was also a total arsehole, objectively and scientifically, but also that his arseholery was a separate thing to his being a genocidal maniac. So it's quite interesting that you could be an arsehole without being a genocidal maniac, and in theory, therefore, you could be a genocidal maniac without being an arsehole. Maybe? Not sure. It does handily note that the country in the world with the least number of arseholes is apparently Japan, and the country with the most, perhaps you can guess, it's America. Apparently the number there is rising as well, so I guess watch out. But it does still note that arseholes, proper, full-on, actual, scientific, objective arseholes, are still rare. There's an interesting sort of idea in terms of how you determine if something is stupid or not. And one of the ideas is that you determine this relative to a fixed point that you determine from a position of feeling slightly superior, I suppose. For example, if you come to me and tell me that you think the Earth is flat, I think you're stupid. So obviously that's me saying that I'm superior to you in that sense. So where you are is relative to me. And then obviously you have to be a bit careful with this, because I mean the flat Earth is a great example because we can see it's not true. You go up high enough and you can see it's bent. So it's not like it's a contentious issue or anything like that. But it does make the point that it is all relative. So in that, it's the warning that you do have to be a little bit careful when judging something to be stupid. In the book, it seemingly quotes Descartes, saying that the peculiar nature of error is that it can't recognise itself. But I tried copy and paste that into Google and I can't find any reference. I'm not sure if it is Descartes, but it's a great line anyway, so kind of who cares. But it makes the point nicely that if you are stupid about something, you don't necessarily know. So it's a very difficult problem to do something with. So it's important to be aware of our own limitations, because everyone can be stupid at some point. But at the same time, there is always a greater fool, as it says. So it's, again, alluding to that problem that everything is a bit floaty and relative. So there's no objective kind of, yes, that's stupid. It is a hard one. A good example of that actually is you can do something that you know is stupid because you say later on, it's like, yeah, I knew I shouldn't have done that and I still did it. I think everyone can relate to that. And you get really intelligent people doing dumb stuff because they've got weird biases. It also notes that mistakes aren't necessarily hallmarks of stupidity, but persisting in mistakes and error is. So, make a one-off thing, that's just, unless, depending on what it is, obviously. But certainly mistakes in general, not necessarily stupidity. That does also tie in with the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is something I run into a lot in my line of work. I'm working in finance. It's basically the idea that you can know a little bit about a subject, but it's not enough to realise how little that you know. So you get very bright people. Finance is a great example, who learn a little bit about finance and think they know it all, but the sphere is so vast. So only the experts in it know that there's all the things they don't know. Quite often it's the case that people get a little bit and cause a big problem, and that can be a great source of stupidity, especially for people who've never heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. But that's probably ought to be something we all keep an eye out on. One of the experts interviewed in the book is Daniel Kahneman, the guy who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, which I don't think I've read. But in a nutshell, it's the idea that thinking fast is sort of your heuristic gut response to things. You respond emotionally and quickly, and thinking slow is analytical and it's not very emotional and all the rest of it. I kind of wish I'd read this before I did the Boris Johnson review. But this does tie into what Boris said, in that the Boris bus is emotive and it will move a nation, whereas you make the case that it was democracy and all the rest of it. It won't, because it's cold, hard, analytical, and it just doesn't move people at all. That seems to tie into this sort of post-truth idea, which is a ridiculous concept, isn't it? That the world is getting worse and worse in terms of being moved by emotional ideas rather than actual facts. And it's, if you don't, I guess there's your definition of stupidity, isn't it? If that's not stupid, I don't know what is. A few other little bits. Intelligence won't protect you from stupidity. There are plenty of super intelligent people doing really stupid things. For example, unhealthy habits. It notes that creativity can be a byproduct of stupidity. So, some of the great creations of the past perhaps come from a bit of stupidity, maybe. And it does also note that critical thinking is a separate thing to intelligence, which is obviously nothing to do with stupidity. But I just thought that was an interesting idea, because you kind of associate critical thinking with intelligence, but apparently not. That being said, this is a book on stupidity in which an expert on psychology, and presumably therefore stupidity, because he's appearing in a book about stupidity, makes the comment that faith leaves no room for doubt. But that's completely to mischaracterise faith. So that is stupidity demonstrated in a book about stupidity, which is a little bit odd, and odd as well that it wasn't edited out. But maybe that's a matter of opinion. This is a good example, isn't it? To me, that seems stupid, because it seems obviously not true, because faith in anything doesn't have to be in the absence of doubt. But maybe I'm wrong. I think I'm not wrong on that. I don't know. Interested to know what anyone else thinks, whether I'm right or wrong. Does faith leave room for doubt? Finally, whilst it fails to come to any sort of neat definition of stupidity, it does at least offer some advice for how to deal with it. First is, don't fight stupidity, just avoid idiots. Be open-minded, so you don't fall into the trap of thinking you're the one who's right and everybody else is wrong. And get comfortable with the idea that there's almost nothing that we can be certain about. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoy that. It's quite light-hearted. It does meander a little bit, but it's a difficult subject to try and pin down. But it's quite funny. It did certainly make me laugh in places, so well worth a read.